The rain came down like shattered glass. Ilara pressed her body against the stone wall of the pack house corridor, her bare feet slipping on polished marble that had turned slick with water tracking in from the storm. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each one burning through her chest like she'd swallowed fire. The dress clung to her skin, crimson silk that now felt like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. She hadn't chosen red. She never wore red. But tonight, someone had laid it across her bed with a note that simply read, "Wear this. Trust me." She'd been a fool to trust anyone in this house. The hallway stretched before her, lined with portraits of Alpha Kings past, their painted eyes seeming to track her desperate flight. Thunder cracked overhead, and the chandeliers swayed, casting dancing shadows that looked too much like reaching hands. Her heart slammed against her ribs, not just from fear, but from something else. Something that pulsed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat, wild and ancient and utterly terrifying. The baby. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, still flat, still hiding the secret that would either save her or damn her. 6 weeks. That's all it had been. 6 weeks since she'd realized the nausea wasn't from grief, and the exhaustion wasn't from crying herself to sleep every night in a bed that had once been warm with promises. 6 weeks since Kale had stopped looking at her like she mattered. Footsteps echoed behind her, heavy boots on marble, moving with predatory precision. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The bond between them, frayed and bleeding as it was, still sang with recognition. Still pulled at something deep in her chest even as every rational thought screamed at her to run. Alpha King Kale Stellan. Her mate. Her destroyer. Ilara. His voice rolled through the corridor like distant thunder, low and commanding and edged with something she couldn't name. Stop. She didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The grand doors at the end of the hall called to her, massive oak panels carved with phases of the moon, the only barrier between her and freedom. Beyond those doors lay the pack house steps. Beyond the steps, the boundary line. Beyond the boundary. Anywhere but here. I said stop. Closer now. She could feel the heat of him, the raw power that radiated off an Alpha King like a physical force. The wolves in the rooms around them would be cowering, instinctively responding to the dominance in his tone. But Ilara had never been good at cowering. She ran. Her feet barely touched the ground as she sprinted toward the doors, silk dress tangling around her legs. The marble was freezing beneath her soles, but she barely felt it. All she could feel was the desperate, clawing need to escape this house, escape the whispers, escape the way the other wolves looked at her now. Like she was broken. Unwanted. A rejected mate clinging to a bond that her alpha had already severed in everything but name. She was 3 feet from the door when his hand closed around her wrist. The contact sent electricity screaming up her arm, the mate bond flaring to life with a violence that stole her breath. She gasped, stumbling, and he caught her other arm, spinning her around to face him. For one moment, they stood frozen, his hands burning against her skin, her pulse thundering so loud she was sure he could hear it. Kale looked like a storm given flesh. 6.5 feet of barely controlled power, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in wet strands, and eyes the color of amber set ablaze. Those eyes had once looked at her with something that felt like devotion. Now they were hard. Cold. The face of a king who'd made his choice and had no room for regret. Let me go. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. She was proud of that, even as tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. No, simple. Final. The word of a man who'd never learned to bend. I'm leaving, Kale. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze even though it felt like staring into the sun. You've made it perfectly clear I don't belong here. You don't want me. You don't want. Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard, refusing to say the rest. Refusing to tell him about the life growing inside her when he'd already made it clear there was no future for them. Something flickered across his face, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. Pain, perhaps. Or regret. But then his jaw tightened, and the mask slammed back into place. "That dress isn't leaving this pack house," he said, his voice dropping to a growl that vibrated through her bones. "And neither are you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Around them, the air grew heavy, charged with the kind of tension that preceded violence or transformation. She could feel wolves gathering in the shadows of nearby rooms, drawn by their alpha's power, by the spectacle of a rejected mate being put in her place. Humiliation burned through her chest, hotter than the bond, hotter than the strange power that had been building beneath her skin for weeks. This was it then. The final degradation. He would drag her back to her room, lock her away, make sure the entire pack knew that she was his prisoner, not his partner. "You can't do this," she whispered, hating how her voice shook. "You can't just keep me here like I'm nothing." His hands tightened on her arms, not enough to hurt, but enough to hold. Enough to keep her from running. When he spoke again, his voice was so low only she could hear it, and every word felt like a blade sliding between her ribs. "I can do anything I want. I'm your alpha. Your king." He leaned closer, and she could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes, could smell the pine and smoke scent that belonged only to him. "And you will obey." The bond twisted inside her, torn between submission and rebellion. But beneath it all, beneath the hurt and rage and confusion, something else stirred. That second heartbeat. That wild, ancient power that whispered she was more than this. More than a discarded mate. More than a wolf who'd been deemed too weak, too broken, too dangerous for the man who'd sworn to love her. The dress seemed to grow heavier against her skin, the silk almost burning now. She looked down at it, really looked at it for the first time, and saw the faint shimmer of symbols woven into the fabric. Symbols that glowed with a light that had nothing to do with the chandeliers overhead. Her blood turned to ice. "Kale." She looked up at him, and for just a moment, she saw past the cold mask to the man beneath. Saw the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled almost imperceptibly where they held her. "What did you do?" But he was already stepping back, releasing her arms, his face settling into the expression she'd come to know too well, the one that said he'd made his choice and would burn the world down before he changed his mind. "Guards," he called, his voice ringing through the corridor with absolute authority. "Escort my mate back to her chambers. She is not to leave this floor. Is that understood?" 2 guards materialized from the shadows, wolves she'd once considered friends. They wouldn't meet her eyes as they moved to flank her. Alara stared at Kale, searching his face for any hint of the man who'd once traced the mate mark on her shoulder and sworn he'd never let anything harm her. But that man was gone. Or maybe he'd never existed at all. "I'll never forgive you for this," she said softly. Not a threat. A promise. Something flickered in his eyes again, that same ghost of pain. But his voice when he spoke was carved from ice. "Good. Hate me if you need to, but you'll hate me alive." The words made no sense. None of this made sense. But before she could demand answers, the guards were guiding her away, their grips gentle but unyielding, and Kale was turning his back on her, walking away down the corridor like she'd already ceased to exist. Alara let them lead her back toward the prison of her chambers, her mind spinning, her heart fracturing with every step. The dress burned against her skin like a brand, and the power inside her screamed for release. She didn't know what game Kale was playing. Didn't know why he'd become the monster everyone had always whispered he could be. But as thunder shook the pack house and lightning illuminated the portraits of dead kings, Alara made a vow of her own. She would find out the truth. She would survive this. And she would make sure that Kale Stellan understood exactly what he'd lost when he'd chosen to cage the woman who carried his legacy beneath her heart. Even if it killed them both. Before we dive deeper into this world of betrayal and hidden truths, if you're already feeling the pull of Alara's story, hit that subscribe button for Shayla's Romance Library. Because we're just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens when a caged wolf finally remembers she was born with fangs. The chamber door shut behind her with a finality that echoed through her bones. Elara stood in the center of the room that had once felt like a sanctuary and now felt like a tomb. The guards had left without a word, their footsteps fading down the corridor, and she was alone. Always alone now. The silence pressed against her ears, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the pack house grounds. She moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Below, she could see the boundary line, a faint shimmer in the darkness, where pack magic met the wild lands beyond. Freedom was so close. Just 100 yards of manicured lawn and ancient oak trees. So close she could taste it. But the dress on her skin pulsed with that strange, terrible warmth, and some instinct older than thought told her that crossing that line would be the last thing she ever did. Her reflection stared back at her from the rain-streaked glass, a woman she barely recognized. Her dark hair hung in damp waves past her shoulders, and her eyes looked too large in her face, shadowed with exhaustion and something that might have been despair. The crimson dress seemed to glow against her pale skin, the symbols woven into the fabric now clearly visible, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Or was it matching the baby's heartbeat? She couldn't tell anymore where she ended and this new life began. Why? She whispered to her reflection. Why would he do this? The Kale she'd known, the man who'd courted her with wildflowers and whispered promises under starlight, would never have imprisoned her. That Kale had traced the mate mark on her shoulder with reverent fingers and told her she was the missing piece of his soul. That Kale had made love to her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. But that Kale had died 6 weeks ago. The change had been sudden. Brutal. One morning she'd woken in their shared bed, wrapped in his warmth, and by evening he'd moved his things to the king's private chambers on the opposite wing. No explanation. No fight. Just cold, clinical distance and a public announcement that the Alpha King required space for important pack business. Within days, whispers had started. That she'd disappointed him. That she was too weak to stand beside a king. That he'd been seen with someone else, a beautiful she-wolf from the Northern Territories who carried herself like she already wore a crown. Elara had tried to confront him, tried to demand answers. But Kale had looked through her like she was made of glass, his voice devoid of emotion as he told her to stop making a spectacle and accept reality. So she had. She'd accepted that the mate bond was a lie. Accepted that whatever she'd thought they had was nothing but a fragile illusion. Accepted that she would raise this child alone, far from this place, far from the man who'd shattered her. Or so she'd thought before tonight. Before the dress. Before his hands on her arms and those words that felt like both a threat and a plea. You'll hate me alive. What did that mean? A soft sound from the corner of the room made her spin around, heart leaping into her throat. For a moment, she saw nothing but shadows. Then the shadows moved. A figure emerged from beside the massive wardrobe, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace that marked a powerful wolf. But this wasn't one of the guards. This wolf moved like smoke, like something that had learned long ago how to exist in the spaces between notice and discovery. Elara's hand went instinctively to the letter opener on the nearby desk, her body coiling to fight even as her mind catalogued the futility of it. If this was an assassin, she was already dead. But the figure stepped into the moonlight filtering through the windows, and Elara's breath caught. It was a woman. Tall and lean, with sharp features and silver blonde hair pulled back in a severe braid. She wore the dark leather of a warrior, weapons strapped to her thighs and across her back, and her eyes were the same amber gold as Kale. Elara breathed. You have his eyes. The woman's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. We share more than eyes. I'm Saris, the Alpha King's sister. She moved closer, her steps careful, non-threatening. And I'm here to explain why you're still breathing. Ilara tightened her grip on the letter opener, her mind spinning. Cale had a sister? In all their time together, he'd never mentioned family. She'd assumed they'd all perished in the war that had elevated him to the throne at 19, the same war that had orphaned half the pack and left the Alpha King cold and unreachable to everyone. Everyone except her. Or so she'd thought. I don't understand, Ilara said, hating how her voice shook. What are you talking about? Saris glanced toward the door, her expression tightening. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. We don't have much time. He'll know I'm here soon enough, and he'll be furious. She turned back to Ilara, and there was something in her gaze, pity mixed with respect. That dress you're wearing? It's not a dress. It's a death sentence. The words confirmed what Ilara's instincts had been screaming. She looked down at the crimson silk, at the glowing symbols that seemed to writhe across the fabric like living things. What is it? A blood mark. Woven by the High Council's best witch. Saris moved to the window, keeping her body angled so she could watch both Ilara and the door. The moment you cross the pack boundary wearing that dress, the magic will activate. It will sever the mate bond instantly and violently. The shock alone would kill you. Her gaze dropped to Ilara's stomach, and her voice softened. Both of you. The world tilted. Ilara reached out, gripping the edge of the desk to keep herself upright. The council did this? Why? What could they possibly gain from? Everything. Saris cut her off, her amber eyes blazing with barely controlled fury. You're not just some random she-wolf, Ilara. You're a moonbound sovereign. The first one born in 3 centuries. The words meant nothing. Less than nothing. Ilara shook her head, confusion mixing with fear. I don't know what that is. I'm nobody. I was an Omega in my birth pack before. Before they cast you out for manifesting silver fire when you were 14? Saris interrupted, and Ilara's blood turned to ice. Before they called you cursed and sent you into exile to die in the wildlands? Before you somehow survived alone for 3 years, living off nothing but instinct and a power you didn't understand. How did she know that? Ilara had never told anyone about her childhood, not even Cale. The shame of it, being cast out by her own blood, branded as dangerous and wrong, had been too deep to speak aloud. The silver fire, Saris continued, her voice urgent now. That's the mark of your bloodline. Moonbound sovereigns are the original queens, Ilara. Before the Alpha Council, before the pack system, before everything, your ancestors ruled. They were females born with the ability to create heirs so powerful that even the moon goddess herself had to bind their bloodline. She paused, letting that sink in. The child you're carrying? It's not just an alpha heir. It's the first true king born in 300 years. A ruler who could end the council's reign forever. The room spun. Ilara pressed both hands against her stomach, feeling the flutter of life inside her, this tiny, impossible thing that was suddenly the center of a conspiracy she didn't understand. That's insane. If that were true, someone would have found me years ago. The council would have. They did find you, Saris said flatly. 2 months ago. Right after you bonded with Cale. Right after you conceived. She turned from the window, and her expression was grim. They made him an offer. Give you up voluntarily, let them take you away to some hidden location where you'd birth the child under their supervision. Afterward, they'd kill you and raise the king themselves, molded into whatever puppet they needed. The words hit like physical blows. Ilara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Cale would never. Cale said no. Saris's voice softened, and for the first time, Ilara saw past the warrior's mask to the sister beneath, someone who loved her brother fiercely, despite everything. He told them to go to hell. So they gave him an ultimatum, cooperate or they'd have you assassinated. Make it look like an accident. A wolf gone rogue. A fall down the stairs. They have a dozen contingency plans, and every single one ends with you dead and the baby in their custody. Ilara's legs gave out. She sank into the chair beside the desk, her mind reeling. Everything, the coldness, the distance, the public humiliation, none of it was real. It was all protection, she whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. He's protecting me. Saris nodded slowly. A rejected mate is beneath the council's notice. Why waste resources killing someone the Alpha King has already discarded? So Kale did the only thing he could think of. Her voice went rough with emotion. He made himself into the villain of your story. Made you believe he stopped loving you. Made the entire pack believe you were nothing to him. Because as long as everyone thinks you're worthless. I'm safe, Alara finished, her heart cracking open all over again, but this time, not from betrayal. From understanding. From the terrible, beautiful truth of what Kale had sacrificed. His reputation. Her trust. Their happiness. Everything. The dress was supposed to be discovered, Saris continued. One of the council's spies planted it in your room, hoping you'd wear it tonight and flee. Hoping you'd make it to the boundary before anyone stopped you. She moved closer, crouching down so they were eye level. But Kale knew. He's had wolves watching you every moment, invisible guards making sure no one gets close enough to hurt you. When he saw you wearing that dress, running for the door, she trailed off, shaking her head. I've never seen him move so fast. Never seen him so terrified. Tears burned down Alara's cheeks. She thought of his hands on her arms, the trembling she'd felt in his fingers. The look in his eyes, not coldness, but desperation barely held in check. The way he'd called the guards, his voice steady even though something beneath it had been screaming. You'll hate me alive. He thinks I hate him, she whispered. He knows you hate him, Saris corrected gently. That's the point. As long as you hate him, as long as you want to leave, the council believes their plan is working. They think eventually you'll find a way to escape, or Kale will slip up, and the dress will do its job. She reached out, gripping Alara's hand. But they underestimated him. He'll burn this entire pack to ashes before he lets anything happen to you. Alara looked down at their joined hands, at the crimson dress that had nearly killed her, at the window that showed a boundary she could never cross. So what do? I can't stay here forever. Eventually they'll realize their plan isn't working. Eventually, we fight back, Saris said, steel in her voice. But first, you need to understand what you are. You need to learn to control the power inside you. She squeezed Alara's hand. Because when the council comes, and they will come, you're going to have to be strong enough to face them. Strong enough to protect that child. Strong enough to stand beside a king who's already standing alone. Outside, thunder cracked and lightning illuminated the grounds. For just a moment, Alara thought she saw a massive wolf standing at the edge of the tree line, dark fur and amber eyes turned toward her window. Watching. Always watching. Kale. Her mate. Her protector. Her destroyer who had destroyed himself to keep her whole. Alara stood slowly, wiping the tears from her face. The fear was still there, coiled in her chest like a living thing. But beneath it, something else was stirring. That ancient power. That silver fire that had once terrified a pack into casting her out. Maybe it was time to stop being terrified of what she was. Maybe it was time to become the queen they all feared. Teach me, she said to Saris, her voice steady now. Teach me everything. Because I'm done being protected. She placed both hands over her stomach, over the child that carried a destiny neither of them had asked for. And I'm done letting him face this alone. Saris smiled, a real smile this time, fierce and proud. There's the sovereign. I was wondering when she'd wake up. Saris left the way she'd come, through the shadows, like something that had never existed at all. But her words remained, echoing in the silence of the chamber, reshaping everything Alara thought she knew about herself. About Kale. About the life growing inside her that had somehow become the center of a war she hadn't known was being fought. Alara moved to the vanity, her legs still unsteady, and slowly began working the crimson dress off her shoulders. The fabric clung to her skin, reluctant to release her, and when it finally pulled at her feet, She could swear she heard it whisper. The symbols had stopped glowing, but they were still there, dark threads woven into red silk, waiting for her to make the fatal mistake of crossing the boundary. She kicked the dress away, sending it sliding across the polished floor like a serpent. Then she stood there in nothing but her undergarments, staring at her reflection in the mirror, searching for some sign of this power Ceres claimed lived inside her. A moon-bound sovereign. The words tasted like ash and honey on her tongue, like something both terrible and sacred. Her fingers traced the mate mark on her shoulder, the elegant swirl of silver that had appeared the night Kale claimed her, the night the bond snapped into place and she'd felt complete for the first time in her life. It still glowed faintly, proof that despite everything, despite the distance and the coldness and the lies, the bond remained. Damaged, perhaps. Bleeding at the edges. But not broken. Not yet. "Who am I?" she whispered to her reflection. "Really?" The girl staring back at her looked too young to be carrying the weight of prophecies and dead queens. She was 22. Just 22. For years ago, she'd been dying in the wild lands, half-starved and feral, living in a cave and hunting rabbits with her bare hands because her wolf was too broken to shift properly. For years ago, she'd been the Omega nobody wanted. The cursed child with silver fire in her veins and madness in her eyes. The memories rose up like floodwater, and this time, Alara didn't push them away. She'd been 14 when the fire first came. It had been winter in the Thornridge Pack, the kind of bitter cold that turned breath to crystals and made even the strongest wolves huddle close to the den fires. Alara had been helping her mother prepare the evening meal, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, when the visiting alpha from the Eastern Territories had arrived. She remembered his eyes on her. Remembered the way he'd smiled, predatory and wrong, as he'd asked her father if she was of age yet. Remembered her father's nervous laugh, the way her mother had pulled her close, protective but powerless against pack hierarchy. The visiting alpha had reached for her hair, commenting on how pretty she'd become, how valuable she'd be when she matured. His fingers had been inches from her face when something inside Alara had snapped. The fire had erupted from her skin like a living thing, silver flames that burned cold instead of hot, that sang with a frequency that made every wolf in the den howl in pain. The visiting alpha had stumbled back, his hand blistered, his face twisted in shock and rage. And Alara had stood there, 14 and terrified, watching silver fire dance across her palms like water. She'd expected her parents to defend her, to explain that she'd been frightened, that she hadn't meant to hurt anyone. Instead, her father had looked at her with horror, with fear. "Unnatural," he'd whispered. "The old magic. It's in her blood." Within an hour, the pack elders had convened. Within 2 hours, they'd pronounced their judgment. Alara was cursed, touched by something that predated the moon goddess's blessing. She was dangerous, unstable, a threat to the natural order. By dawn, they'd driven her beyond the pack boundaries with nothing but the clothes on her back and orders to never return. Her mother had cried. Her father had looked away. And Alara had learned the first brutal truth of her existence. Power without control made you a monster, not a queen. She'd survived 3 years in the wild lands through sheer stubbornness and the same silver fire that had gotten her exiled. When rogue wolves came for her, she burned them. When winter tried to claim her, she burned warmer. When grief threatened to drown her, she burned until there was nothing left inside but ashes and the will to see another sunrise. She'd been 17, half dead from infected wounds after a fight with a bear, when Kale found her. Not Kale the Alpha King. Just Kale, a young wolf running patrol at the edges of his territory, drawn by the scent of blood and silver fire. He'd shifted to human form, approached her carefully like she was something wild that might bolt. His amber eyes had been cautious, but not cruel. Curious, but not condemning. "You're hurt," he'd said simply. She'd bared her teeth at him, silver fire flickering across her knuckles in warning. Stay back. But he hadn't stayed back. He'd crouched down, close enough that she could have burned him, and held out his hand. I'm Kale. And I'm guessing you haven't let anyone help you in a very long time. Something in his voice, the gentleness, the lack of fear, had broken through her defenses. She'd let him carry her back to the pack healer. Let him visit her every day while she recovered. Let him listen to her story without judgment, without horror, without once looking at her like she was cursed. The silver fire, he'd said one night, watching it dance harmlessly across her palm. It's beautiful. Like moonlight given form. It's made me a monster, she'd replied bitterly. No, he'd taken her hand, his skin warm against hers, unafraid of the flames that flickered between their joined fingers. It's made you a survivor. There's a difference. She'd fallen in love with him in that moment. Fallen so completely that when the mate bond snapped into place 6 months later, when his wolf recognized hers and hers sang in response, it had felt less like fate and more like coming home. For 2 years, she'd been happy. For 2 years, she'd believed the curse was broken. That love was enough. That Kale saw her not as a monster or a weapon or a threat, but as simply Alara. His mate. His equal. His choice. And then 6 weeks ago, he'd stopped looking at her altogether. Alara pressed her palm flat against the mirror, watching silver fire flicker to life beneath her skin. It responded to emotion, fear, rage, desperation, and right now, all three were warring inside her chest. If what Saris said was true, this fire wasn't a curse. It was a birthright. The mark of queens who'd ruled before the Alpha Council had seized power and rewritten history to erase any mention of female sovereignty. The moonbound sovereigns had been erased from pack lore, relegated to myth and legend, their power deemed too dangerous to acknowledge. But they'd existed. She was living proof. And the child she carried, Kale's child, would be proof that the old bloodlines could be awakened. That the Council's grip on power was more fragile than they wanted anyone to believe. No wonder they wanted her dead. The realization settled over her like armor. This wasn't about her anymore. Wasn't about a broken heart or a mate who'd chosen cruelty to keep her safe. This was about every she-wolf who'd been told she was too weak to lead. Every Omega who'd been cast aside. Every woman who'd carried power in her veins and been punished for it. This was about changing everything. A soft knock at the door made her jump. She grabbed a robe from the nearby chair, pulling it on quickly as she called out, "Who is it?" "Healer Mira, my lady." An elderly voice, familiar and kind. "I've brought tea and salve. The Alpha King requested I check on you." Of course he did. Even now, even while playing the villain, Kale was making sure she was cared for. Making sure she was safe. The thought made her chest ache. Alara opened the door to find the pack's head healer standing there with a tray, a petite woman with gray hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Mira had been the one to tend Alara when she'd first arrived, broken and half-wild. The one who'd taught her about pack medicine and herbalism, giving her purpose when she'd had none. "Come in," Alara said quietly, stepping aside. Mira entered, setting the tray on the small table near the fireplace. Her gaze swept over Alara with practiced efficiency, noting the tear tracks on her cheeks, the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand unconsciously rested on her stomach. "You know," the healer said softly, beginning to pour tea from the steaming pot. "I've served this pack for 43 years. I've seen 3 Alpha Kings rise and fall. And I've never seen one suffer the way Kale Stellan suffers now." She looked up, meeting Alara's eyes. "Whatever game he's playing, child, it's killing him. Every night he stands outside your door in wolf form. Every night he bleeds from a bond he's forcing himself to damage. Every morning he wakes looking like death itself." Tears burned fresh tracks down Alara's face. "He's trying to protect me." "I know." Mira handed her the tea, chamomile, and something else, something that would help her sleep. "But protection without truth is just another form of prison. For both of you." She paused, then added carefully, "The child will feel it too. The bond stress. It's not healthy for any of you. Alara sank into the chair, cradling the warm cup between her palms. What am I supposed to do? If the council finds out I know the truth, if they realize Kale and I are still, she broke off, unable to finish the sentence. Then you become what you were always meant to be, Mira said simply. You stop being prey and start being predator. You stop letting others decide your worth. The old healer reached out, touching Alara's cheek with surprising gentleness. The silver fire in your veins? That's not just power, child. It's proof. Proof that some things refuse to stay buried. Some bloodlines refuse to die. Alara looked down at her hands, at the faint shimmer beneath her skin. I don't know how to be a queen. I barely know how to be a wolf. Then learn. Mira stood, collecting her things. Learn fast. Learn fierce. Because the council won't wait forever, and when they move against you, they'll move with everything they have. She paused at the door, glancing back. And Alara? The Alpha King may be protecting you. But he needs you to protect him too. He's standing alone against the council, against tradition, against 5 centuries of precedent. How much longer do you think he can hold before he breaks? The door closed softly, leaving Alara alone with her tea and her thoughts and the terrible weight of truth. Kale was breaking. She was breaking. And the child between them, this impossible, prophesied child, deserved parents who were whole. Who were strong. Who could stand together instead of suffering apart. Saris had said to learn. To understand what she was. But understanding wasn't enough. Alara set down the tea and moved to the window, staring out at the boundary line that glowed faintly in the darkness. Somewhere beyond her sight, she knew Kale was standing guard. Watching. Waiting. Slowly destroying himself to keep her alive. Well, she was done letting him stand alone. The silver fire flickered to life across her palms, brighter now, responding to her will instead of her fear. It didn't burn. It sang. And for the first time since that terrible night 6 weeks ago, Alara felt something other than grief. She felt rage. Clean and bright and holy. They wanted to erase her? Make her disappear? Treat her like a vessel for their plans and nothing more? Let them try. She was a moon-bound sovereign. The first queen born in 300 years. And she was done apologizing for the fire in her blood. 3 nights passed before Saris returned. 3 nights of Alara pretending to be the broken, rejected mate while secretly working with healer Mira to understand the power coursing through her veins. 3 nights of feeling Kale's presence outside her door, his wolf form a silent sentinel, his pain bleeding through the bond like a wound that wouldn't close. 3 nights of the silver fire growing stronger, more responsive, until Alara could summon it with nothing but a thought. On the 4th night, Saris appeared in her room just after midnight, materializing from the shadows near the bookshelf like she'd been part of the darkness itself. Get dressed, she said without preamble, tossing a bundle of dark clothing onto the bed. Something practical. We're going somewhere your mate won't be able to follow. Alara's heart lurched. Where? Somewhere old. Somewhere the council's spies won't think to look. Saris's amber eyes gleamed in the moonlight. Somewhere your ancestors left messages for daughters they knew would eventually come. 20 minutes later, they were moving through the pack house like ghosts, Saris leading, Alara following, both of them dressed in black and keeping to the corridors where shadows pooled deepest. They passed sleeping guards, slipped through a servant's entrance that opened onto the kitchen gardens, and made their way toward the forest that bordered the eastern edge of the territory. What about the boundary? Alara whispered as they approached the tree line. The dress is still in your room, exactly where you left it. Saris glanced back, a grim smile playing at her lips. The death mark only works if you're wearing it. But don't mistake that for freedom. The council has other ways of tracking you if they suspect you've left the pack house grounds. We have maybe 2 hours before someone notices you're gone. They plunged into the forest, and immediately the world transformed. Ancient oaks rose around them like cathedral pillars, their branches weaving together overhead to block out the stars. The air smelled of moss and earth and something older, something that made Alara's wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin, recognizing this place on an instinctual level even though she'd never been here before. "This forest predates the pack," Saris said quietly as they moved deeper into the trees. "It was here before the council, before the Alpha system, before everything. Some wolves won't even hunt here. They say it belongs to the old gods." She ducked under a low-hanging branch, her movements fluid and sure. "They're not wrong." The trees grew denser, the path narrower, until Alara was certain they'd lost any semblance of direction. But Saris moved with confidence, following markers only she could see: a notch in bark here, a stone arrangement there. The forest seemed to breathe around them, watching, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a clearing. Alara stopped dead, her breath catching in her throat. In the center of the clearing stood a structure that shouldn't exist. Not here. Not hidden in a forest that hundreds of wolves must have passed through over the centuries without ever finding it. It was a temple, small but perfectly preserved, built from white stone that seemed to glow with its own internal light. Columns supported a domed roof, and between the columns, Alara could see glimpses of carved walls covered in symbols that made her silver fire pulse in recognition. "What is this place?" she breathed. "The Temple of the First Queen." Saris moved forward, her voice reverent. "Built 300 years ago by the last moonbound sovereign before the council hunted her down and executed her for refusing to submit to their authority. They tried to destroy this temple, but the magic protecting it was too strong. So they did the next best thing." She glanced back at Alara. "They erased it from memory. Made sure no wolf would remember where it stood or what it meant. But you remember. My bloodline has always served yours." Saris reached the temple steps, placing her hand flat against the stone. Immediately, symbols flared to life across the surface, the same symbols that had been woven into the crimson dress. "The Stellan family wasn't always kings, Alara. Once, we were sworn protectors. Kale's great-great-grandmother was bonded to the last sovereign. When the council executed your ancestor, our ancestor died defending her." Her voice went rough. "Our family has been waiting 300 years for another queen to rise. For another chance to fulfill the oath." The implications crashed over Alara like a tidal wave. "That's why the mate bond snapped for us. It wasn't just fate. It was destiny," Saris finished. "Blood calling to blood. The protector finding his queen." She pushed open the temple doors, and they swung inward silently, revealing an interior lit by sourceless silver light. "Come on. There's something you need to see." Alara climbed the steps on trembling legs, her heart hammering against her ribs. The moment she crossed the threshold, power washed over her, ancient and vast and utterly female. It sang through her bones, ignited her blood, made the silver fire flare so brightly that she had to close her eyes against the intensity. When she opened them again, she was glowing. Actually glowing, silver light pouring from her skin like moonlight made solid. "Holy gods," she whispered. No, Saris stood beside her, or written across her features. "Not gods. Queens." The temple interior was circular, the domed ceiling painted with constellations Alara didn't recognize, patterns that seemed to shift and move when she looked directly at them. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with carvings, each one telling a story. Women with crowns of silver flame. Women standing before armies. Women cradling infants that glowed with the same light Alara now carried. And in the very center of the temple, set into the floor, was a pool of water so clear it looked like liquid crystal. "The mirror of moonlight," Saris said softly. "It shows truth. Past, present, and future. But only to those with sovereign blood." She gestured toward the pool. "Look into it, Alara. See what your ancestors left for you." Alara approached the pool slowly, her reflection rippling in the still water. But as she knelt beside it, as her glowing fingers touched the surface, the water stilled completely. And then it changed. Images rose from the depths like memories surfacing from deep water. She saw a woman who looked like her, same dark hair, same storm-gray eyes, standing before a gathered host of wolves. A crown of silver fire burned above her head, and in her arms, she held an infant whose tiny fists were wrapped around threads of moonlight. The first sovereign, Alara knew instinctively. The mother of kings. The image shifted. Now the woman stood on a battlefield, silver fire pouring from her hands in waves that sent enemy wolves scattering. She fought not with claws or teeth, but with pure power, the kind that bent reality itself. Another shift. The woman older now, seated on a throne with that same child grown to a young man standing beside her. He wore a crown too, but his was different, golden where hers was silver, solid where hers was flame. And the way he looked at her, there was love there. Respect. But also something else. Fear. The image fractured, replaced by scenes of violence. The golden-crowned king leading wolves against his mother. The council forming, swearing oaths to end the reign of queens. The sovereign fighting, burning, screaming as they ripped her child from her arms and drove a blade through her heart. The last image showed a young woman, barely more than a girl, fleeing through a forest with her hand pressed to her pregnant belly, silver fire streaming behind her like a comet's tail. She looked over her shoulder once, her face twisted with grief and rage and desperate hope. Then she vanished into the trees, and the pool went still. Alara sat back on her heels, tears streaming down her face. They killed her. They killed the first queen and stole her power. Not stole, Saris corrected quietly. Buried. They couldn't destroy what she was, the moon goddess herself had blessed the bloodline. But they could make sure no one remembered what queens were capable of. They could rewrite history, establish the Alpha system, and make sure every she-wolf born afterward believed her only purpose was to be a mate. A mother. A support. Her voice hardened. Never a ruler in her own right. And now Alara couldn't finish the sentence. It was too big. Too impossible. Now you're the first sovereign to survive long enough to carry a child to term in 300 years, Sarah said. Every other woman who manifested the bloodline was found and killed before she could reproduce. But you, she shook her head in wonder. You survived exile as a child. Survived the wildlands as a teenager. Found your way to your sworn protector and bonded with him before the council even knew you existed. Do you understand how impossible that is? How many variables had to align perfectly? Alara looked down at her hands, at the silver fire that now danced across her palms like it belonged there. What does the child mean? Saris said it would be a true king, not just an alpha. Look again. Saris gestured to the pool. Ask it to show you the future. Hard in her throat, Alara leaned forward and whispered to the water, Show me my child. The pool rippled once, then cleared. And what rose from the depths made Alara's breath stop completely. She saw herself older, stronger, crowned in silver fire that burned like a star. Beside her stood Kale, his amber eyes fierce and proud, his hand resting on the shoulder of a boy who couldn't be more than 10 years old. The child had Kale's dark hair and strong features, but his eyes burned silver. Not amber like his father's. Not gray like hers. Pure, molten silver that seemed to hold the light of the moon itself. And when the boy raised his small hand, both silver fire and golden light erupted from his palm, two powers that should have been impossible to hold simultaneously, merged into something entirely new. The unified king, Saris breathed, staring at the image. A ruler who carries both bloodlines. Who can command with alpha authority and create with sovereign power. The council has spent 3 centuries making sure this child could never be born. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because a unified king would have the power to remake the entire wolf world. To end their reign. To return balance. The vision shifted one last time, and Alara saw the boy grown to a man, standing before assembled packs with that same dual power radiating from him like dawn breaking. Wolves knelt before him not in fear, but in reverence. And behind him, carved into a massive stone wall, were words that glowed with silver fire. Here stands the child of the last queen and the sworn protector. Here begins the age of balance. Here ends the age of chains. The pool went dark and the temple fell silent. Elara sat there, her mind spinning, her heart too full of emotion to name. This was why the council wanted her dead. This was why Kale had sacrificed everything to protect her. Not because she was his mate. Not even because she carried his child. But because together, they were going to change everything. I don't know how to be what they need, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm nobody. I don't know how to rule. How to fight the council. How to. You're not nobody. Saris knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. You're the daughter of queens who refused to stay buried. You're the woman who survived when everyone expected you to die. You're the mother of the future. She squeezed gently. And you're the maid of a king who loves you so much he's willing to become a monster to keep you safe. That's not nothing, Elara. That's everything. Tears fell freely now, splashing into the pool and sending ripples across the surface. Elara thought of Kale standing guard outside her door every night. Thought of his hands trembling as he held her. Thought of the way he'd looked at her in that corridor, like it was killing him to push her away. He'd seen this future. Somehow, he'd known what their child would become. And he'd decided it was worth any price. Any pain. Even hers. The council will come, Saris said quietly. Sooner than we'd like. They're already suspicious that their dress failed to kill you. They'll send assassins. Spies. They'll try to force Kale's hand. She released Elara's shoulders and stood. But now you know what you're fighting for. Now you understand the stakes. Elara rose slowly, feeling the weight of destiny settling over her like a crown she hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. The silver fire burned steady now, not wild and uncontrolled like before, but focused. Purposeful. She was done being afraid of what she was. Done apologizing for the power in her blood. Teach me, she said again, but this time her voice was steady. Strong. Teach me how to use this fire. Teach me how to fight. How to protect my child. How to stand beside Kale when the council comes. She met Saris's amber gaze directly. Teach me how to be a queen. Saris smiled, fierce and proud and just a little bit wild. Now you're talking. But we need to move fast. Dawn's coming and Kale will lose his mind if he realizes you left the pack house. She moved toward the temple entrance, then paused, glancing back. One more thing. When the time comes, when you finally confront the council, you're going to have to make a choice. What choice? Whether to destroy them completely. Saris's expression went grim. Or show them mercy. Queens have both power and compassion. Kings have only power. The choice you make will determine what kind of ruler your son becomes. The words echoed through the temple as they left, following Elara back through the forest, back to the pack house, back to the chamber where a crimson dress lay in the corner like a sleeping serpent. Back to the invisible war where she was no longer just a pawn. She was the queen. And it was time to start playing her own game. The council arrived 3 days later, without warning and without mercy. Elara woke to the sound of wolves howling, not the familiar calls of the pack, but something darker. More disciplined. The howls of trained killers announcing their presence with cold precision. She bolted upright in bed, her heart slamming against her ribs as silver fire instinctively flared across her hands. The pre-dawn light filtering through the windows cast everything in shades of gray and violet, and for one disorienting moment, she couldn't tell if this was real or another nightmare. Then the door to her chamber burst open. It wasn't Saris. It wasn't Kale. It was Mira, the healer, her face pale and her hands shaking as she gripped the door frame. They're here. The High Council. 20 wolves, maybe more. They've demanded an audience with the Alpha King, and they've brought, her voice cracked. They've brought execution witnesses. The words hit like a physical blow. Execution witnesses. Wolves whose sole purpose was to observe and verify kills ordered by the council, ensuring no alpha could claim ignorance or interference. They'd come to kill her. Today. Now. Where's Kale? Elara was already moving, throwing on the dark training clothes Saris had given her, her mind racing through everything she'd learned over the past 3 nights. The breathing exercises to control the silver fire. The meditation techniques to access the deeper well of power. The combat stances that would let her channel magic through movement. 3 nights hadn't been enough. Not nearly enough. In the great hall, facing them down, Mira moved further into the room, pressing a small vial into Elara's hand. This will mask your scent for an hour. Maybe less. If you're going to run. I'm not running. Elara's voice came out harder than she intended. She softened it, meeting the healer's frightened eyes. Not anymore. Where's Saris? With the Alpha King. But, Elara, Mira gripped her arm. There are too many of them. Even if Kale fights, even if every loyal wolf in this pack stands with him, the council has the authority to declare him rogue. They can call for wolves from every territory in the region. They can do whatever they want, Elara interrupted quietly. But I won't make it easy for them. She tucked the vial into her pocket and moved toward the door. Stay here. Lock this behind me. If anything happens, nothing's going to happen to you. Myra's voice shook with fierce determination. Not while we still breathe. Elara wanted to believe that. Wanted to think that loyalty and love could stand against the kind of institutional power the council wielded. But she'd seen the vision in the temple pool. She'd seen queens burning. She'd seen children stolen and bloodlines ended. History had a way of repeating itself. She moved through the corridors with her heart in her throat, every shadow making her jump, every sound potentially marking an assassin's approach. But the pack house was eerily quiet. Most of the wolves had gathered in or near the great hall, drawn by the commotion and the undeniable pull of their alpha's distress radiating through the pack bonds. As she approached the massive doors of the great hall, she could hear voices, Kale's, deep and controlled but edged with something dangerous. And another voice, older and cold as winter, speaking with the kind of authority that came from centuries of unchallenged power. Elara pressed herself against the wall beside the door, listening. Unauthorized bonding with an unvetted female, the cold voice was saying. A violation of council law that requires immediate dissolution of the mate bond and removal of the female from pack territory. Elara is my mate. Kale's voice could have cut steel. Chosen by the moon goddess herself. You have no authority to dissolve what she has ordained. We have every authority. A different voice now, female and sharp. The moon goddess's blessing doesn't supersede council law. Especially when the female in question is what? Kale's growl reverberated through the stone walls. Say it. Tell my pack exactly what you're accusing my mate of being. Silence. Thick and dangerous. Then the cold voice spoke again, and this time there was something almost amused in it. Dangerous, Alpha King. We're saying she's dangerous. A woman with unregistered power, no documented lineage, and a history of violence against her birth pack. A pause. Sound familiar? It should. It matches the profile of every rogue sovereign we've hunted and eliminated over the past 3 centuries. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elara's blood turned to ice. They knew. They knew exactly what she was, and they were saying it out loud, here, in front of the entire pack. Stripping away Kale's careful protections and forcing everything into the open. My mate, Kale said, each word precise and lethal, is under my protection. Whatever you think she is. We don't think, boy. The cold voice hardened. We know. And we're here to correct the mistake of allowing her to live this long. Movement, the sound of boots on stone. You have 2 choices. Hand her over voluntarily, and we'll make it quick. Painless. The child will be extracted and raised under council supervision, and you'll be permitted to choose another mate from an approved bloodline. Or, Kale's voice was barely above a whisper now, but it carried more threat than any shout. Or we declare you rogue for harboring a sovereign. We strip your title, dissolve your pack, and execute both of you along with anyone who stands in our way. The cold voice paused. And then we'll still take the child. But this way, everyone you love dies first. Ilara's hand went to her stomach, to the tiny life growing there, the unified king who would either save them all or die before he ever drew breath. The silver fire burned beneath her skin, responding to her fear and rage, begging to be released. But Ceres's training echoed in her mind. Control is everything. Power without control is just destruction. She needed to think. Needed to. The great hall doors exploded outward. No, not exploded. Were ripped open by pure force, the massive oak panels slamming against the stone walls hard enough to crack. And standing in the doorway, wreathed in golden light that made every wolf in the vicinity drop to their knees in instinctive submission, was Kale. But this wasn't the Kale she knew. Wasn't the man who'd held her gently or kissed her like she was something precious. This was the Alpha King in his truest form, the primal force he'd been suppressing for years, finally unleashed. His eyes burned pure gold, no trace of amber remaining. His body radiated heat and power that distorted the air around him. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ancient authority that made even the stones themselves seem to tremble. You want my mate? Each word resonated like a death knell. Come and take her. Chaos erupted. Wolves poured from the great hall, 20 council enforcers in their formal black leather, each one a trained killer, each one moving with coordinated precision. They shifted mid-stride, massive wolves with silver collars that marked them as council property, and they came at Kale like a living wave. He met them with nothing but claws and fury. The first 3 wolves went down before they'd closed half the distance, their throats torn out with surgical efficiency. The next 2 tried to flank him and were slammed into the stone walls hard enough to leave cracks in the ancient masonry. Kale moved like violence incarnate, like something that had forgotten what mercy meant, and the council wolves fell before him like wheat before a scythe. But there were too many. Even as he fought, more poured from the great hall. And behind them, Ilara caught a glimpse of the council members themselves, 5 figures in formal robes, watching the carnage with cold, calculating eyes. They weren't even concerned. They were studying him, testing his limits. This was a trap. Kale. Ceres's voice cut through the sounds of battle. She emerged from the hall in her own wolf form, smaller than the males, but faster, her silver-blonde fur bristling as she tore into a council wolf that had been moving to attack Kale from behind. They're stalling. There are more coming from the eastern entrance. More. Of course there were more. The council had planned this down to the last detail. And Ilara was standing here doing nothing while her mate fought for both their lives. The silver fire erupted from her skin before she could think to control it. One moment she was pressed against the wall, human and powerless. The next, flames were pouring from her hands, her eyes, her very core, silver light so bright it turned the pre-dawn darkness into blazing noon. Every wolf in the corridor froze. Every wolf turned to look at her. And in the sudden, terrible silence, Ilara heard one of the council members laugh, a sound like breaking glass. There she is. The cold voice from before, now embodied by a tall man with gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. The little sovereign finally shows her true colors. How convenient. Ilara stepped forward, the silver fire streaming behind her like a cloak, her fear transforming into something far more dangerous. You want me? Here I am. Call off your dogs and face me yourself. Ilara, no, Kale started forward, but 3 council wolves intercepted him, and even his immense power couldn't break through fast enough. The gray-haired man smiled. Brave words from a child playing with forces she doesn't understand. He gestured, and 2 robed figures stepped forward, a man and woman, both with their hands raised, both chanting words in a language that predated the packs themselves. Witch magic. They'd brought witches. The air pressure changed, becoming heavy and oppressive. Elara felt something wrap around her power, trying to smother it, trying to choke the silver fire back into her veins. The witch's magic pressed against her like chains, like hands around her throat, and for a terrible moment, she couldn't breathe. You see, the gray-haired man's voice was almost gentle. You're strong, little sovereign. Stronger than most. But you're untrained. Unfocused. You never stood a chance. The chains tightened, and Elara fell to her knees, gasping. The silver fire flickered, dimming. She could hear Kale roaring, could feel his desperation bleeding through their bond, could hear the sounds of him tearing through wolves to reach her. But the witch's magic held her fast. This was it then. This was how it ended. On her knees in a corridor, too weak to fight, too slow to learn, too. No. The word came from somewhere deep inside her, not her own voice, but something older. Something that had been sleeping for 300 years, waiting for this exact moment. You are not weak. You are not untrained. You carry the memory of every queen who came before you. Their power. Their knowledge. Their will. Remember. And suddenly, Elara did remember. Not her own memories, but theirs. The first sovereign standing on a battlefield, silver fire answering to her command like an extension of her will. The next queen calling lightning from clear skies. The last sovereign burning so bright that, even as they drove the blade through her heart, her killers had wept with grief for what they were destroying. You are their daughter. Their legacy. Their revenge. Now stand. Elara's eyes snapped open, and they burned pure silver. The witch's chains shattered like spun glass. The silver fire exploded outward in a wave that sent every wolf flying backward, council enforcers, pack members, everyone except Kale and Saris, who stood at the center of the blast like calm in the heart of a storm. When the light cleared, Elara was standing. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, visible only as shapes of silver light, stood the queens. All of them. Every moonbound sovereign who had ever lived, their power flowing into her, through her, making her something more than just one frightened woman. Making her what she was always meant to be. A force of nature. The gray-haired man's smile had vanished. In its place was something that looked almost like fear. Impossible, he breathed. The awakening was supposed to require years. Rituals. Training. You can't just. Can't I? Elara's voice came out doubled, her own voice layered with dozens of others, a chorus of queens speaking with one mouth. She raised her hands, and the silver fire danced across her palms like living things. You hunted us. Killed us. Tried to erase us from history. But you made one critical mistake. She took a step forward, and the council wolves retreated. You forgot that power doesn't die. It sleeps. It waits. It finds new vessels. Another step. And I'm done waiting. The silver fire rose around her like wings, and when she looked at Kale, her mate, her protector, her equal, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart soar. Not fear. Not shock. Pride. Together, he said simply. Together, she agreed. And as the Alpha King and the moonbound sovereign stood side by side, as their power, golden and silver, old and ancient, masculine and feminine, merged into something the wolf world hadn't seen in 3 centuries, the council members finally understood. They hadn't come to execute a threat. They'd come to witness the birth of a revolution. The gray-haired man raised his hand, magic crackling between his fingers. Kill them both. Kill them now before. But he never finished the sentence. Because Elara had already moved, silver fire streaming from her hands like starlight made solid, and this time, she wasn't the one being hunted. She was the hunter. And the council was about to learn why queens had been feared enough to erase from history. Elara woke to the sound of arguing. Not the distant kind that echoed through pack house walls, but close, just beyond the chamber doors. Angry voices, one of which she recognized as Saris, the other unfamiliar, but carrying the weight of authority. She sat up carefully, finding herself alone in Kale's massive bed. Pale afternoon light filtered through the windows, telling her she'd slept for hours. Her body still ached from channeling so much power, but the bone-deep exhaustion had eased. And the baby, she pressed a hand to her stomach. The baby's presence pulsed steady and strong, like a second heartbeat keeping time with her own. The door opened and Kale entered, his expression grim. He'd changed into clean clothes, his hair still damp from a recent wash, but the tension in his shoulders told her the battle might be over, but the war had just begun. "You're awake." He crossed to her immediately, sitting on the edge of the bed and cupping her face to study her. "How do you feel?" "Like I fought 20 wolves and channeled the power of dead queens." She managed a small smile. "So, about how you'd expect. What's happening out there?" His jaw tightened. "The council sent a messenger. Under flag of truce." The way he said truce made it clear what he thought of that particular word. "They want to negotiate." Alara's blood ran cold. "Negotiate what?" "Terms of your surrender." Kale's eyes flashed gold. "They're claiming that your awakening proves you're too dangerous to live freely. That the safety of all packs requires you to submit to council custody until the child is born." His hand moved to cover hers on her stomach. "After which, they'll consider whether to allow you supervised visits." "That's not negotiation. That's a death sentence dressed up in diplomatic language." Saris's voice came from the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, her expression murderous. "They're banking on you being reasonable. On you choosing the greater good over your own life. And if I refuse? Then they'll declare both you and Kale rogue. They'll call every alpha in the Northern Territories to hunt you down. They'll paint you as a threat to the natural order and Kale as a king corrupted by his mate Bond." Saris pushed off the doorframe, moving into the room. "Within a week, we'll have 500 wolves at our borders. Within 2 weeks, every pack within 3 territories will have been fed stories about the mad sovereign and her puppet king." The words settled over the room like a shroud. Alara looked between Kale and Saris, seeing the same grim determination on both their faces. They'd already discussed this. Already made their decision. "You're going to fight," she said quietly. "We're going to fight," Kale corrected, his hand tightening over hers. "Together. Like we agreed. Against 500 wolves? Kale, that's suicide. Even with my power. Your power is exactly why we can win." Saris moved to the window, staring out at the forest. "The council has spent 3 centuries suppressing knowledge of what sovereigns can do. Most wolves have no idea what they're facing. They think you're just a rogue with some fire tricks." She turned back, and her smile was sharp. "We're going to show them exactly how wrong they are." Alara wanted to feel encouraged by the confidence in Saris's voice. But all she could think about was the vision from the temple pool, her child grown and powerful, yes, but at what cost? How many would die in the battles leading up to that future? "There has to be another way," she said. "Some way too." "There isn't." Kale's voice was gentle but absolute. "The council will never stop hunting you. Not while you live. Not while you carry a child who could end their reign. The only way forward is through them." A knock at the door interrupted whatever Alara might have said. Mira entered, her face pale, carrying a sealed envelope. "This just arrived. By Raven. It's marked urgent." Kale took the envelope, his expression darkening as he recognized the seal pressed into the wax, the council's official mark. He broke it open, pulling out a single sheet of parchment covered in elegant script. As he read, the color drained from his face. "What?" Alara reached for him, alarmed. "What does it say?" He handed her the letter without a word. The script was formal, cold, and utterly damning. "To Alpha King Kale Stellan. We write to inform you that evidence has come to light regarding the female known as Alara. According to testimony provided by her birth pack, The female was not exiled for manifesting power, as she has claimed. She was exiled for the murder of 3 pack members, including a juvenile male of 8 years. The silver fire she wields was first used to kill a child who rejected her advances. When his parents attempted to intervene, she killed them as well. Her birth alpha deemed her too dangerous to execute within pack territory and instead cast her out, hoping distance would prevent further bloodshed. This information, along with sworn testimonies from 17 witnesses, has been presented to the Northern Council of Alphas. They have voted unanimously to support our efforts to contain this threat. You have until sunset tomorrow to surrender the female for trial. Failure to comply will result in your immediate designation as a rogue alpha and the dissolution of your pack's charter. We await your response. High Council of the Wolf Territories. The words blurred as Alara read them a second time, then a third, her mind refusing to process what they were saying. Murder. They were accusing her of murder. Of killing a child. It's not true. The words came out strangled. The boy who died, her throat closed around the memory, around the guilt she'd carried for 8 years. He was trying to protect me. From the visiting alpha. He pushed between us when the fire erupted, and she couldn't finish. Couldn't say how the silver flames had engulfed him, how his screams had echoed through the den, how his parents had died trying to reach him through fire that wouldn't extinguish. I know. Kale's arms came around her, pulling her tight against his chest. I know, love. I know what really happened. How? She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. I never told you about. I sent scouts to your birth pack 2 years ago, after you told me you'd been exiled. His hand stroked through her hair, soothing. They interviewed wolves who'd been there that night. Got the real story, not the version your alpha told the council. His voice hardened. The visiting alpha was known for abusing young females. He'd paid your alpha for access to you. That boy, Torin, his name was, he tried to stop it. Tried to protect you. And when your power erupted in self-defense, when the flames caught him instead, his parents blamed me. Alara's voice broke. The whole pack blamed me. Because it was easier than holding their alpha accountable for selling a child to a predator. Saris's voice was ice. And now the council has twisted that tragedy into a weapon. They've convinced the Northern Alphas that you're a murderer. That your power makes you unstable. Dangerous. Alara pulled back from Kale, scrubbing at her eyes. Then it's over. If they have testimony, if they've convinced the other alphas. It's not over. Kale's voice cut through her spiral like a blade. Because every wolf who was there that night is still alive. And several of them have already sent word that they'll testify to the truth if needed. The council is lying, Alara. Manufacturing evidence to turn other packs against us. But the other alphas believe them. Because they don't know the truth yet. Saris moved to the desk, pulling out a map of the territories. We have witnesses. We have proof. What we need is time to present it. Time to show the Northern Council that they've been manipulated. We don't have time. Mira spoke for the first time, her voice heavy. Sunset tomorrow is less than 30 hours away. Even if we could gather witnesses and travel to the Northern Council chambers, there's no guarantee they'd listen. Not when the High Council has already framed the narrative. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Alara stood slowly, her mind working through impossible calculations. Then I go to them. Absolutely not. Kale was on his feet instantly. That's exactly what they want. You in custody, where they can. Where they can put me on trial. Alara met his eyes steadily. A public trial, with witnesses and testimony. In front of every alpha in the Northern Territories. She turned to Saris. The council can't kill me quietly if I submit to trial, can they? It would undermine their authority. Make them look like tyrants instead of protectors. Saris's eyes widened. You want to use their own system against them. I want to make them prove their accusations in front of witnesses who can refute them. Alara's voice grew stronger as the plan took shape. If I run, I look guilty. If Kale fights for me, he looks corrupted. But if I walk into that trial and face my accusers, she looked at Kale. They'll have to let me speak. Let witnesses testify. And when the truth comes out, when other alphas see that the council has been lying, it undermines everything they've said about you, Kale finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. It makes other alphas question what else the council has lied about. Exactly. Ilara moved to the map, studying the territories marked in different colors. But I can't just surrender. That gives them too much control. I need to demand trial by the old laws. The ones that predate the council's authority. Trial by sovereign right. Saris breathed the words like a prayer. It hasn't been invoked in 300 years, Ilara finished. Because there haven't been any sovereigns to invoke it. But the law still exists, doesn't it? It's still written in the original pack codes. It is. Kale was staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Trial by sovereign right gives you the authority to demand testimony from any wolf, to call witnesses from any pack, and to require absolute truth under penalty of Moon Goddess's judgment. His expression shifted from wonder to concern. But it also requires you to present yourself at the council chambers alone. No mate, no protector, no pack support. That's suicide, Saris said flatly. The moment you're inside those chambers without Kale, they'll kill you. Trial or no trial? Maybe. Ilara's hand went to her stomach, to the life growing there. Or maybe they'll be too busy trying to figure out how a supposedly mad, murderous rogue knows ancient pack law well enough to invoke sovereign right. She looked at Kale, her heart breaking at the fear in his eyes. This is the only way. You know it is. If we fight, people die. If I run, we spend the rest of our lives being hunted. But if I face them, if I use their own laws to expose their lies, you might actually survive, Kale finished, his voice hollow. And I might lose you anyway. She crossed to him, taking his face in both hands. You won't lose me. I'm a survivor, remember? I survived exile. Survived the wild lands. Survived you trying to push me away. She managed a weak smile. I can survive a council trial. You can't promise that. No, she agreed. But I can promise I'll fight with everything I have. I can promise that our child deserves to be born into a world where the truth matters more than power. Where queens aren't erased and mates aren't forced apart because of fear. She pressed her forehead to his. Let me do this. Let me be what I was meant to be. Not just your mate. Not just a mother. But a queen who stands for something. Kale's hands came up to cover hers, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. If anything happens to you, if they hurt you, then you burn their world to ashes. She said it simply, like a fact. But until then, you trust me. You believe in me. And you let me fight my own battle. The silence stretched between them, charged with everything unsaid. Finally, Kale nodded once, sharp and final. Sovereign right. We invoke it formally at dawn. That gives us tonight to prepare, to gather what witnesses we can reach quickly. He looked at Saris. Send word to the wolves from Ilara's birth pack. The ones who've offered to testify. Tell them we need them at the council chambers in 2 days. 2 days isn't much time. It's what we have. Kale's voice carried absolute authority now. And Saris? Send word to every alpha we trust. Tell them the High Council is lying. Tell them a sovereign has risen and invoked the ancient laws. His eyes blazed gold. Tell them the old world is dying, and they can either stand with us as it's reborn or burn with the council as it falls. Saris's smile was fierce. Now that's a message worth sending. As she and Mira left to begin preparations, as the chamber fell quiet once more, Ilara turned back to Kale. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Good. He pulled her close, wrapping her in his warmth. Means you're smart enough to understand the danger. But Ilara. He tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. I've never been more proud of anyone in my life. And I've never been more terrified of losing someone. So when you walk into those chambers, his voice cracked. Come back to me. Whatever it takes, however you have to fight, come back to me. I will, she promised. I will. But even as she said the words, Even as she let him hold her through the fading afternoon light, a cold certainty settled in her chest. The council would never let her walk out of those chambers alive. Not if they had anything to say about it. And the trial she was walking into wasn't about justice or truth. It was about survival. For her. For her child. For every wolf who'd ever been told their power made them dangerous instead of divine. Tomorrow, at dawn, everything would change. One way or another. The council chambers were older than the packs themselves. Ilara stood at the entrance, her hand resting on the massive iron doors that had witnessed 3 centuries of judgments, executions, and the systematic erasure of everything she represented. Dawn light filtered through the forest canopy above, casting the ancient stone structure in shades of gold and shadow. Behind her, she could feel Kale's presence 100 yards back, as the law required, but close enough that the mate bond thrummed between them like a living wire. He couldn't follow her inside, couldn't stand beside her, couldn't do anything but wait and trust that she would survive what came next. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said quietly from her position beside Kale. Her amber eyes were fierce with concern. "We can still fight, still run, and spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders?" Ilara shook her head. "No, this ends today. One way or another." She pushed open the doors. The interior was exactly as she'd seen in the temple visions, a circular chamber with a domed ceiling, ringed by stone benches that rose in tiers like an amphitheater. At the center stood a raised platform carved with symbols that matched the ones on the death-marked dress. And seated on the highest tier, wearing robes of deep crimson, were the 5 members of the High Council. The gray-haired man from the pack house attack sat in the center position, the head counselor. To his left and right sat 2 women and 2 men, all of them ancient, all of them radiating the kind of power that came from centuries of controlling wolf society from the shadows. And filling the lower tiers, watching with varying degrees of curiosity and hostility, were the alphas. Dozens of them. Every major pack leader in the Northern Territories, summoned to witness what the council clearly expected to be a quick execution disguised as justice. Ilara's footsteps echoed as she walked toward the central platform. She wore simple white. Saris had insisted on it, saying that sovereigns always faced judgment in the color of moonlight. Her dark hair hung loose past her shoulders, and she'd left the mate mark on her shoulder visible. Let them see what Kale had claimed. Let them see what the council wanted to destroy. The silver fire flickered beneath her skin, responding to her racing heart, but she kept it contained. Controlled. Saris's words echoed in her mind. "They'll try to provoke you. Try to make you lose control so they can justify killing you as unstable." She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Ilara of no pack, the head counselor's voice rang out, cold and formal. "You stand accused of murder, unlawful use of forbidden magic, and existing as a threat to the natural order. How do you answer these charges?" Ilara stopped at the platform's edge, her chin lifted. "I invoke trial by sovereign right." The silence that followed was absolute. Then chaos erupted. Alphas rose from their seats, shouting questions. The council members exchanged sharp glances. And the head counselor's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, rage, and something that might have been fear. "That law hasn't been invoked in 300 years, he said finally, his voice tight. "You have no right. I have every right." Ilara's voice carried through the chamber with surprising strength. "I am a moonbound sovereign, daughter of the queens who ruled before your council existed. The law was written for women like me, by women like me. And it still stands in the original pack codes." She paused, letting that sink in. "Unless you're saying the council no longer follows the old laws?" A trap, and they both knew it. If the council denied her right to invoke sovereign trial, they admitted they'd moved beyond the ancient laws that every alpha in this room had sworn oaths to uphold. It would undermine the very foundation of their authority. The head counselor's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he settled back in his seat, and his smile was like a blade. Very well. Trial by sovereign right it is. Though I wonder if you understand what you've just invoked. I understand perfectly. Ilara stepped onto the platform, and immediately she felt it, ancient magic rising from the stone, wrapping around her like invisible chains. This was the truth circle. Anyone who stood here and spoke lies would be marked by the moon goddess herself. Under sovereign right, I may call any witness, compel any testimony, and demand absolute truth from all who speak. Indeed. The head counselor leaned forward. But it also means that you must speak only truth. Every word you say on that platform will be judged by the goddess. One lie, one evasion, one half-truth, and you'll be marked as unworthy. And an unworthy sovereign may be executed without trial. His smile widened. Still want to proceed? Ilara felt the weight of the magic settling over her like a physical thing. It pressed against her consciousness, demanding honesty, stripping away any ability to deceive. For anyone else, it would have been terrifying. But Ilara had spent 8 years living with the truth of what she was. She had nothing left to hide. I'm ready, she said simply. Then let us begin. The head counselor gestured to one of the other council members, a woman with silver hair and eyes like winter frost. Counselor Thera will present the charges. You will have the opportunity to refute them. And then we will hear testimony from witnesses. At the end, the assembled alphas will vote on your fate. Counselor Thera stood, pulling a scroll from her robes. Her voice was cold, clinical, as she read, Ilara, called the Cursed One by her birth pack, stands accused of 3 murders committed when she was 14 years of age. The victims, Torin Ashwood, age 8. Marcus Ashwood, age 34. Elena Ashwood, age 32. All 3 died by silver fire, a forbidden magic that predates pack law and is explicitly banned by council decree. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ilara forced herself to remain still, to keep her expression neutral even as old grief clawed at her chest. Furthermore, Thera continued, the accused is charged with concealing her bloodline, that of the moonbound sovereigns, a matriarchal line deemed too dangerous to exist by council mandate. By bonding with an alpha king and conceiving a child of mixed bloodline, she has committed an act of biological terrorism that threatens the stability of all packs. Biological terrorism. They were calling her pregnancy an act of war. These charges carry a penalty of immediate execution, Thera finished, rolling up the scroll. Does the accused have anything to say in her defense? Ilara took a slow breath, feeling the truth magic pulse around her. I have much to say. But first, I would like to call my first witness. She turned to face the assembled alphas. I call Alpha Marcus Thornridge of the Thornridge Pack. My birth alpha. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. On the 3rd tier, a man rose slowly, older now than Ilara remembered, his hair more gray than brown, but she recognized him instantly. The man who'd presided over her exile. Who'd called her cursed. Who'd sent a 14-year-old girl into the wild lands to die alone. He descended to the platform reluctantly, his expression carefully neutral. But Ilara could see the tension in his shoulders. Could smell the fear on him. Alpha Thornridge, she said once he stood beside her, also now held by the truth magic. Tell these alphas what really happened the night Torin Ashwood died. Thornridge's jaw tightened. The official report states that you murdered. I didn't ask for the official report. Ilara's voice cut through his words like steel. I asked for the truth. And the magic on this platform will know if you lie. She paused. So I'll ask again, what really happened that night? Sweat beaded on Thornridge's forehead. The truth magic pressed against him, demanding honesty. He tried to resist. She could see it in the way his body went rigid, but the ancient power was older than pride. Older than fear. A visiting alpha from the Eastern Territories had come to negotiate a trade agreement, Thornridge said finally, the words seeming to be torn from him against his will. Alpha Davros Blackwood. He expressed interest in you. Said he'd be willing to pay handsomely for access once you came of age. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Several alphas rose from their seats, expressions darkening. Continue, Alara said quietly, her heart hammering. Your parents refused initially, but Blackwood increased his offer. And our pack was struggling. The trade agreement would have saved us from bankruptcy. Thornridge couldn't meet her eyes. So I told your parents to bring you to the meeting den. To let Blackwood see you. To encourage the match. I was 14, Alara said, each word precise. 14 years old. Not of age. Not yet even having experienced my first shift. Yes. The admission was barely audible. And what happened when Alpha Blackwood attempted to touch me? Thornridge closed his eyes. Torin Ashwood, one of the pack children, he ran into the den. He'd been listening outside. He threw himself between you and Blackwood. Started shouting that it was wrong, that you were just a child, that someone needed to stop it. A pause. And then your power manifested. Silver fire. It erupted from your skin in response to your terror, and Torin was standing too close. The flames caught him before anyone could react. And his parents? Tried to reach him through the fire. But the silver flames don't extinguish with normal magic. By the time we got water from the river, all three were. He trailed off. Dead, Alara finished. All three dead because I was terrified and my power answered that terror. Because my alpha had sold me to a predator and a boy tried to save me. Yes. Thornridge's voice was hollow. And yet your official report claimed I murdered them deliberately. That I used forbidden magic to kill a child who rejected my advances. Alara turned to face the assembled alphas. Tell them why you lied. Because the alternative was admitting I'd arranged to sell a child to a predator. The words came out in a rush, pulled by the truth magic. Because if the council learned what I'd done, I'd be executed for violating pack law. Because it was easier to cast you out and call you cursed than to face judgment for my own crimes. The chamber erupted. Alphas were on their feet, shouting, some in outrage, some in shock. The head counselor was hammering his staff against the stone floor, demanding order. But Alara just stood there, feeling 8 years of shame and guilt lifting from her shoulders. The truth was out. Finally, the truth was out. The witness may step down, the head counselor said coldly once order was restored. He turned his ice-chip eyes on Alara. A touching story. And the truth magic confirms your alpha lied in his initial report. But that changes nothing about what you are. About the danger you represent. Then let me call my second witness, Alara said. I call Counselor Thera to the platform. The silver-haired woman went rigid. I am a council member. I cannot be compelled to. Under sovereign right, I can compel testimony from anyone, Alara interrupted. Even council members. Even you. She gestured to the platform. Unless you'd like to admit publicly that the council considers itself above the old laws? Thera descended slowly, rage written in every line of her body. The moment she stepped onto the platform, the truth magic wrapped around her, and Alara saw her flinch. Counselor Thera, Alara said carefully. How many moonbound sovereigns has the council hunted and killed over the past 300 years? That information is classified. The truth magic yanked, and Thera gasped in pain. When she spoke again, her voice was strained. 47. We've eliminated 47 women who manifested the sovereign bloodline. Horror rippled through the chamber. Even some of the council members looked uncomfortable. 47 women, Alara repeated softly. And how old were most of them when you killed them? Between 14 and 20. Thera's voice was barely audible now. We track manifestations. The moment a girl shows signs of the silver fire, we take action. You murder children. Alara's voice remained steady, but inside, rage was building, cold and terrible and controlled. You murder teenage girls for the crime of being born with power you can't control. We protect the packs. Thera's control snapped. The sovereigns nearly destroyed us 300 years ago. They ruled with absolute power, treating alphas like slaves, forcing males to kneel. That's a lie. The voice came from the entrance. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway, wreathed in silver light that made her look more spirit than flesh, was a woman Alara had never seen before. Ancient beyond measure, with white hair that flowed like starlight and eyes that held the depth of centuries. She wore robes the color of moonlight, and when she stepped into the chamber, every wolf, council member, and alpha alike dropped to their knees in instinctive recognition. "Who dares?" the head counselor began. "I am Lyra Moonwhisper," the woman said, her voice carrying impossible authority. "The last surviving moonbound sovereign before Alara. I was 18 when the council tried to execute me. I survived by allowing them to believe I died, and I've spent the past 273 years living in exile, waiting for the bloodline to rise again." Her eyes found Alara's. "Waiting for you." Alara's breath caught. This woman, this sovereign, had been alive all this time? "The council has lied about our history," Lyra continued, moving toward the platform. "Sovereigns never enslaved alphas. We ruled alongside them. Male and female power in balance, just as the moon goddess intended. But 3 centuries ago, a faction of alphas grew jealous of shared power. They wanted absolute control. So they rewrote history, claimed we were tyrants, convinced other males that female power was dangerous." She stepped onto the platform, and the truth magic flared around her like fire. "And then they systematically murdered every woman who carried our bloodline. 47 confirmed kills, yes. But hundreds more who were killed before they could manifest. Thousands of she-wolves who were suppressed, dominated, and taught to believe they were lesser." The head counselor rose, his face twisted with rage. "You have no right to be here. You have no. I have every right." Lyra's voice cracked like a whip. "I invoke elder right. I am the oldest living wolf in these territories. I predate your council. I predate the alpha system. And under the old laws, the ones you claim to follow, I have the authority to speak truth in any trial." The head counselor opened his mouth, then closed it. He couldn't refute her. The laws were clear. "The truth," Lyra said, turning to face the assembled alphas, "is that sovereigns were created by the moon goddess to balance alpha power. Where alphas have strength and dominance, sovereigns have wisdom and creation. Where alphas command, sovereigns nurture. Together, male and female, we were meant to rule as equals." Her voice softened. "But the council destroyed that balance. And for 300 years, wolf society has been incomplete, broken, ruled by force instead of harmony." She turned to Alara, and her ancient eyes were kind. "This child and the baby she carries, they represent the return of balance. A sovereign bonded to her sworn protector, carrying a child of mixed bloodline who can wield both powers. This is not a threat, alphas. This is salvation." Silence filled the chamber. Absolute, trembling silence. Then, from the back tier, an alpha stood. He was young, barely older than Kale, with copper hair and green eyes. "I'm Alpha Rowan Clearwater of the Western Ridge Pack. And I would like to formally request that the council explain why they've been lying to us for 3 centuries about the nature of sovereign power." Another alpha rose. Then another. Within moments, dozens were on their feet, all demanding answers. All questioning the authority they'd accepted without examination. The head counselor's face had gone pale. "You cannot. Order. I demand order." But the chamber had descended into chaos. Alphas were shouting questions. Council members were arguing among themselves. And through it all, Alara stood on the platform, feeling the truth magic pulsing around her, feeling the weight of history shifting. This was it. The moment everything changed. "Enough." The head counselor's voice carried unnatural amplification, silencing the room. He turned to Alara, and all pretense of civility was gone from his expression. "You want truth? Here's truth. Sovereigns are dangerous. They birth children who can't be controlled. Children who could overthrow centuries of careful social order. children who could plunge the packs into civil war. He gestured sharply. So yes, we've been eliminating them. And we'll continue to eliminate them. Including you. The admission hung in the air like poison. You just confessed to systematic genocide, Lyra said quietly. On a truth platform. In front of witnesses. The head counselor's eyes widened as he realized what he'd done. The truth magic had caught him, pulled the confession from him while his rage had overwhelmed his control. It doesn't matter, he snarled. We have the power. We have. You have nothing. Kale's voice came from the entrance, and Alara's heart leaped. He shouldn't be here. The law forbade mates from entering during sovereign trial. But he was here anyway, standing in the doorway with Ceres beside him and a dozen other wolves behind them, alphas who'd clearly broken away from the assembly to stand with him. Alpha King, the head counselor said coldly. You violate sacred law by entering. You violated sacred law the moment you confessed to 3 centuries of murder, Kale interrupted, moving into the chamber. And under pack law, when the council itself breaks faith with the old ways, any alpha has the right to challenge their authority. He stopped at the edge of the platform, his amber eyes finding Alara's. Pride and love radiated through their bond, so strong it nearly stole her breath. I challenge the council's right to judge my mate, Kale said formally. I challenge their authority over the packs. And I call for a vote of no confidence, to be decided by the assembled alphas here and now. You can't, the head counselor began. He can, Alpha Rowan said, still standing. It's in the old laws. The same laws that allowed sovereign trial. The same laws you claim to uphold. He looked around at the other alphas. I vote no confidence in the High Council. As do I, another alpha called out. And I. No confidence. They've lied to us for centuries. No confidence. The votes came faster and faster, alphas rising to declare their loss of faith in the council that had ruled them for 300 years. And with each vote, Alara felt the tide turning, felt the old world cracking, felt the future her child would inherit becoming possible. When the count was finished, 47 alphas had voted no confidence. Only 3 had stood with the council. By pack law, Kale said into the ringing silence, a vote of no confidence requires the council to step down and submit to judgment by the assembled alphas. Will you do so peacefully? Or will this end in blood? The head counselor looked around at his fellow council members, at the alphas who had turned against them, at Alara, still glowing with silver fire on the platform, flanked now by Lyra's ancient power. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice venomous. You may have won today, but there are other territories, other councils. They'll come for you, for your half-breed child, for everything you represent. Let them come, Alara said quietly, stepping down from the platform. The truth magic released her, and she felt suddenly lighter. Free. Let them come and face what happens when you stop apologizing for what you are. She crossed to Kale, and the moment she reached him, his arms came around her. The mate bond sang between them, whole and unbroken, stronger than ever. I told you to come back to me, he murmured against her hair. I keep my promises, she replied. Around them, the chamber was emptying. Council members were being escorted away by alphas who would serve as temporary judges. Lyra stood near the entrance, speaking with several pack leaders who looked odd just to be in her presence. And Ceres approached, her expression fierce with pride. Well, Sister Queen, how does it feel to dismantle 3 centuries of oppression before lunch? Alara laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in weeks. Exhausting. Terrifying. She looked up at Kale. Absolutely worth it. The baby, he asked, his hand moving instinctively to her stomach. Strong, she confirmed, covering his hand with hers. Like his mother. Like his parents, Kale corrected. Then, in front of everyone remaining in the chamber, he knelt. Not in submission, but in devotion. I, Kale Stellan, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, pledge myself to Alara Moo-bound, Sovereign Queen, as her sworn protector and equal partner. His voice carried through the stone chamber, formal and absolute. I will stand beside her, fight beside her, rule beside her, until death parts us or the moon goddess herself calls us home. Tears burned down Alara's cheeks as she placed her hand on his head, feeling the silver fire flow between them, sealing the oath. And I, Alara Moonbound, accept your oath. Together, we rule. Together, we change everything. When Kale rose, when he kissed her with a fierceness that made the remaining wolves politely look away, Alara felt the future crystallizing around them. There would be more battles, more councils to face, more lies to unravel. But they would face them together. Alpha and Sovereign, male and female, power and wisdom in perfect balance. Just as it was always meant to be. 3 months passed like a held breath. 3 months of Alara's power growing alongside the child in her womb. 3 months of restructuring pack governance, of alphas traveling from distant territories to witness the sovereign who had brought down the council. 3 months of tentative peace that felt more like the calm before a storm. Alara stood at the window of what had once been just Kale's chambers and was now truly theirs, their sanctuary, their war room, their home. Her hand rested on her rounded stomach, feeling the strong kicks of a child who already seemed impatient to change the world. He's restless today, Kale said from behind her, his arms coming around to cradle both her and their son. Like he knows something's coming. Something is always coming, Alara replied, leaning back against his warmth. The question is whether we're ready for it. The Northern Territories had accepted the new order with surprising speed. The old council members were being held for trial, and a temporary governing body of alphas and, for the first time in 3 centuries, female pack leaders had been established. Lyra had stayed, training Alara in the finer points of sovereign power, teaching her the history that had been erased. But the other territories, they were silent. Too silent. The Eastern Council had sent no word. The Southern packs had closed their borders. And the Western Coalition had recalled all their trade caravans, isolating the North completely. They were planning something. Alara could feel it in her bones. A knock at the door broke the moment. Saris entered without waiting for permission, her face grim. We have a problem. A big one. Kale's arms tightened protectively. What kind of problem? The kind with 500 wolves marching toward our northern border. Saris crossed to the map table, pointing to markers she'd already placed. The Eastern Council sent their entire military force. They'll reach our territory line by sunset tomorrow. Alara's blood ran cold. 500. Against our 200, Saris confirmed. And that's counting every adult wolf capable of fighting. They have us outnumbered more than 2 to 1. They're not coming to negotiate, Kale said, his voice flat. They're coming to make an example. To show the other territories what happens when you challenge council authority. Can we evacuate? Alara moved to the map, studying the terrain. Get the civilians out before. There's nowhere to evacuate to, Saris interrupted gently. The Western Territories won't take refugees. The Southern packs have closed their borders. And we can't cross into the wildlands with pregnant females and children, they wouldn't survive. The trap was perfect. Fight and die, or surrender and watch everything they'd built crumble. There has to be another way, Alara insisted. We didn't survive the council's execution just to be slaughtered by Alara. Lyra's voice came from the doorway. The ancient sovereign entered, her expression grave. There is another way. But you won't like it. Tell me. Lyra moved to stand across the map table, her ancient eyes meeting Alara's. The full sovereign awakening. Not the partial manifestation you achieved in the council chambers, but the complete transformation. The form that the first queens used to defend their territories against armies. The Moonfire Queen, Alara breathed, remembering the vision from the temple pool. Yes. Lyra's voice was heavy. In that form, you would have the power to face 500 wolves alone. To create barriers of silver fire that, even trained warriors couldn't breach. To protect your entire territory with nothing but your will. She paused. But the transformation is dangerous. Especially for someone carrying a child. Kale went rigid. How dangerous? The power draw is immense, Lyra said quietly. In ancient times, sovereigns would complete the awakening before conception for exactly this reason. Attempting it while pregnant. She met Alara's eyes. There's a 70% chance you survive. A 30% chance the child survives. A 10% chance you both survive. The numbers hit like physical blows. Alara's hand went instinctively to her stomach, to the son who kicked so strongly beneath her palm. No, Kale said flatly. Absolutely not. We'll find another way. We'll evacuate to the wild lands, we'll watch our pack die, Alara interrupted, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. You know we will. Without the awakening, those 500 wolves will tear through our defenses in hours. Our people will be slaughtered. Everything we've built will burn. Then let it burn. Kale's control finally cracked. Let it all burn, Alara. I don't care about territories or power or revolutions. I care about you. About our son. I won't risk losing you both for what? For people who believed in us? Who stood with us against the council? Alara moved around the table, taking his face in her hands. Kale, we asked them to risk everything. Asked them to defy centuries of tradition. And now, when they need us most, you want me to hide. I want you alive. His voice broke. I want our child alive. Is that so wrong? No. Tears burned in Alara's eyes. No, it's not wrong. It's human. It's beautiful. And it's exactly why I have to try. There's a 90% chance you die, he said desperately. 90%. Those are suicide odds. They're also the only odds we have. Alara turned to Lyra. If I do this, if I attempt the full awakening, what are the chances I can stop 500 wolves? If you complete it? 100%. Lyra's voice was absolute. A fully manifested Moonfire Queen is the most powerful force in wolf society. You would be unstoppable. And if I don't complete it? Then the transformation will kill you and the child both. Lyra's expression softened with sympathy. There's no partial success with the full awakening. Either you become what you're meant to be, or you die trying. Silence filled the chamber, heavy and suffocating. I need to speak with my mate alone, Kale said finally, his voice rough. Saris and Lyra left without argument, closing the door softly behind them. The moment they were alone, Kale pulled Alara against him, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Don't do this, he whispered into her hair. Please, Alara. Don't ask me to watch you die. I'm not asking. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. I'm telling you that I have to try. Because if I don't, if we run or hide or let our pack be destroyed, what kind of world are we bringing our son into? What kind of rulers are we if we only lead when it's safe? You're asking me to choose between you and the pack. No. She pressed his hand to her stomach, to where their son moved beneath her skin. I'm asking you to trust that I'm strong enough to do this. That we're strong enough. She paused. Remember what you said to me that night in the corridor? You'll hate me alive. You were willing to destroy our relationship, destroy yourself, to keep me safe. Now I'm asking you to be brave enough to let me fight my own battle. That was different. I was controlling the situation I could. You couldn't control anything, Alara interrupted gently. The council almost killed us both. My trial almost failed. Every step of this has been faith and fear and hope that we're strong enough to survive it. She cupped his face. Have faith in me now. One more time. Please. Kale closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were wet. If you die, if our son dies, then you burn the world, she finished. Like you promised. But Kale. She kissed him softly. We're not going to die. I'm a survivor, remember? It's what I do. He held her through the fading afternoon light, neither of them speaking, both trying to memorize this moment in case it was their last. Sunset the next day arrived with a weight that pressed against the soul. Elara stood at the northern border, surrounded by her pack, her people, who had gathered to witness what came next. Behind her, the pack house rose against the darkening sky. Beyond the boundary line, she could see them, 500 wolves arranged in military formation, their silver collars gleaming in the dying light. The Eastern Council's executioners. Kale stood at her right, his face carved from stone, radiating dominance that kept the nervous pack members calm. Saris was at her left, weapons ready even though they all knew weapons wouldn't matter today. And Lyra stood directly behind Elara, ancient and powerful, ready to guide the awakening. Last chance to change your mind, Kale said quietly. Not a chance. Elara squeezed his hand once, then released it. Keep them safe. No matter what happens. Promise me. I promise. His voice was hollow. But if this goes wrong, it won't. She turned to Lyra. I'm ready. The ancient sovereign moved to stand before her, placing both hands on Elara's shoulders. The transformation requires complete surrender. You must open yourself to every memory, every power, every queen who came before. You must let go of fear, of doubt, of everything that makes you small. Her eyes were intense. And you must trust that your son is strong enough to survive the fire. That he was born for this moment just as you were. Elara nodded, her heart hammering. She could feel the baby moving inside her, strong kicks that seemed to say, I'm ready too, Mama. Then we begin. Lyra's hands began to glow with silver light. Close your eyes. Remember who you are. Remember who you've always been. Elara closed her eyes. And remembered. She remembered being 14 and terrified, silver fire erupting from her skin. She remembered the wild lands, hunting and surviving and refusing to die. She remembered Kale finding her, seeing past her scars to the woman beneath. She remembered the temple, the visions, the moment she'd understood what she was meant to become. She remembered standing before the council, speaking truth that had been buried for centuries. She remembered every woman who had been murdered for carrying power in her blood. Every queen who had been erased. Every sovereign who had died so that she could live. We are here, their voices whispered in her mind. We have always been here. Waiting for you. Waiting for this moment. The silver fire erupted from her skin, but this time, it didn't just flicker. It burned. It consumed. It transformed. Elara screamed as power poured into her, through her, remaking her from the inside out. Her bones shifted. Her blood burned. Her very soul expanded to contain the collective power of every sovereign who had ever lived. And through it all, she felt her son, felt his tiny heartbeat syncing with hers, felt his power rising to meet hers, felt him becoming something more than just a child. He was helping her. Lending his strength. The unified king, still unborn, already fighting alongside his mother. Together, she thought desperately. We do this together. The transformation accelerated. Silver fire erupted from her skin in waves that sent wolves stumbling backward. Her eyes burned pure silver, brighter than moonlight, brighter than stars. And from her back, wings of silver flame unfurled, massive, beautiful, utterly impossible. When Elara opened her eyes, she was no longer standing on the ground. She was hovering 10 feet in the air, wreathed in silver fire, transformed into something that hadn't existed for 300 years. The Moonfire Queen. Power thrummed through her veins, vast and controlled and absolutely lethal. She could feel every wolf in her territory, could sense their fear and hope and awe. Could feel the 500 enemy wolves across the boundary line, their shock radiating like heat. And she could feel Kale, staring up at her with tears streaming down his face, his bond with her blazing like the sun. I did it, she thought. We did it. Attack. A voice roared from the enemy ranks. 500 wolves charged. And Elara raised her hands. Silver fire erupted from her palms, but this wasn't the wild, uncontrolled flame of her youth. This was precise, purposeful, divine. The fire spread across the boundary line like a living thing, rising into a wall that stretched as far as the eye could see, a barrier of silver flame that pulsed with her heartbeat. The enemy wolves hit the barrier and were thrown back, unharmed but completely unable to breach it. Ilara spread her wings wider, feeling the power respond to her will. She could hold this, could maintain the barrier for days if needed, could protect every inch of her territory with nothing but pain. Sudden, sharp, catastrophic pain that tore through her abdomen. No, she thought desperately. Not yet. Not now. But her body didn't care about timing. The transformation had pushed her too far, demanded too much. And the baby, her strong, powerful son, had decided that if his mother was going to be a warrior queen, he was going to arrive early. Labor. She was going into labor, while hovering 10 feet in the air, while maintaining a barrier that protected 200 wolves, while 500 enemies waited beyond the wall. Ilara. Kale's voice, distant through the haze of pain. Ilara, what's wrong? The child, Lyra, called up to her, her face pale. The transformation triggered early labor. You have to land, you have to. I can't. Ilara gasped through another contraction. The barrier flickered, and she felt the enemy wolves surge forward before she forced it solid again. If I lose concentration, if the barrier falls, then our people die, Saris finished grimly. Another contraction. Stronger this time. Ilara screamed, silver fire flaring wildly before she wrestled it back under control. This was the test. The ultimate test. Could she hold power and give life simultaneously? Could she be both destroyer and creator? Could she protect her pack while bringing new life into a world that had tried so hard to kill them both? Kale, she gasped, looking down at him. At her mate, her protector, her equal. Catch him. What? Our son. Another contraction, so strong her vision widened out. When he comes, catch him. Please. Understanding dawned in Kale's eyes, followed immediately by absolute terror. You can't give birth while flying. That's insane. That's the only option we have. Ilara forced a smile through the pain. I told you. We're survivors. All 3 of us. She closed her eyes, divided her consciousness in a way that should have been impossible. Half of her awareness went to the barrier, maintaining the silver fire, keeping the wall solid. The other half went inward, to the child fighting his way into the world. Come on, little king, she thought. Show them what you're made of. Another contraction. The barrier flickered. Wolves pressed against it from the other side, testing, probing. Hold, she heard Kale commanding their pack. Whatever happens, hold the line behind her. Pain. Fire. The impossible pressure of childbirth combined with channeling enough power to level a city. Ilara had never felt anything like this. Had never imagined anything like this. But she held the barrier, held the power, held herself together through sheer force of will. And then, impossibly, miraculously, she felt the baby crown. Kale. Her voice was barely human, more power than sound. Now. Kale shifted mid-leap, his wolf form launching upward with supernatural strength. He shifted back to human just as he reached her, his arms extended, and caught his son as Ilara's body finally gave up the fight and released him. Time seemed to stop. Ilara, hovering in the air, glowing with silver fire, her wings spread wide. Kale, falling back toward the ground, cradling a newborn who glowed with both silver and gold light. The barrier holding solid, protecting them all. And then the baby took his first breath and screamed, a sound that carried both alpha dominance and sovereign power, announcing his arrival to a world that had tried to prevent his birth. The enemy wolves beyond the barrier fell to their knees. Every single one of them. 500 warriors, dropping in instinctive submission to a child less than a minute old. Because they could feel what he was. What he carried in his blood. The unified king. The child who would change everything. Ilara felt the labor pain recede, felt her body beginning to heal with supernatural speed. The Moonfire Queen form was already knitting her back together, already restoring her strength. She descended slowly, her wings of silver fire folding back as her feet touched the ground. The barrier remained solid, she could maintain it now with barely a thought, the power so much a part of her that it required no more effort than breathing. Kale stood before her, still in shock, cradling their screaming son. The baby's tiny fists were wrapped around threads of power, silver fire, and golden light intertwined, responding to his will even though he couldn't possibly understand what he was doing. "A boy," Kale said, his voice rough with wonder. "We have a son." "We have a king," Ilara corrected softly, reaching out to touch her child's face. The moment her fingers made contact, the baby's screams cut off. He looked up at her with eyes that burned silver gold, and Ilara felt the bond snap into place, mother to child, sovereign to heir. "Hello, little one," she thought. "Welcome to your revolution." Behind the barrier, she could hear the enemy wolves beginning to retreat. Their alpha, a tall man with battle scars and gray in his hair, stood at the front of the formation, staring at the child with an expression that might have been awe or terror or both. "Moonfire Queen," he called out, his voice carrying across the barrier. "The Eastern Council sent us to destroy you. To make an example of your pack." He paused, then slowly, deliberately bent his knee. "But we cannot make war on the divine. We cannot kill what the moon goddess herself has ordained." One by one, the other wolves followed suit. 500 warriors kneeling before a newborn child and his exhausted, glowing mother. "Return to your council," Ilara called back, her voice carrying the power of every queen who had ever lived. "Tell them that the age of fear is over. Tell them that sovereigns have returned, and we will no longer hide. We will no longer apologize." She held her son higher, letting the silver gold light pour from his tiny body. "And tell them that if they come for us again, they will face not just me, but the generation I will raise. The sons and daughters who will grow up knowing they are not lesser, not dangerous, not wrong." She lowered the barrier. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the enemy Alpha rose, bowed deeply, and turned his forces around. They left without another word, 500 wolves retreating into the forest, carrying news that would spread to every territory. The Moonfire Queen had risen. The unified king had been born. And the world would never be the same. Later, when the pack had finished celebrating, when the baby had been cleaned and fed and was sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Ilara stood at the window of their chambers, watching the moon rise. The Moonfire Queen form had faded, leaving her exhausted but whole. The silver fire still flickered beneath her skin, gentler now, waiting to be called again when needed. Kale approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Ilara corrected. "All three of us. I've never been more terrified in my life." His voice was rough. "Watching you up there, in labor, maintaining that barrier, I thought I was going to watch you die. But I didn't." She turned in his arms, meeting his amber eyes. "Because I'm a survivor. And because I had you. And because our son is apparently just as stubborn as his parents." Kale laughed, actually laughed, and pulled her close. "What do we name him?" "This child who made 500 wolves kneel before he was 5 minutes old." Ilara thought of the visions, the temple, the queens who had come before. Thought of the future they'd fought so hard to make possible. "Torin," she said softly. "For the boy who tried to save me. Who died protecting someone he loved." She looked at their sleeping son, at the tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. "And Kale, for his father. Torin Kale Stellenmoonbound." "The unified king," Kale murmured, testing the name. Then he smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen on his face in months. "He's going to be insufferable, isn't he?" Growing up knowing he made armies kneel while still covered in amniotic fluid. "Absolutely insufferable," Ilara agreed. "We'll have our hands full." "Good." Kale kissed her forehead. I wouldn't have it any other way. They stood there, holding each other, watching their son sleep. Outside, the pack was settling in for the night, secure in the knowledge that their sovereign could protect them. That their future, uncertain and dangerous as it might be, was no longer defined by fear. Tomorrow, there would be more challenges. More councils to face. More territories to win over. More wolves to teach that power didn't have to mean domination, that strength could coexist with compassion, that male and female could rule as equals. But tonight? Tonight, a family rested. A queen, a king, and the child who would change the world. Together. Just as they were always meant to be. The story continues in the next chapter of Shayla's Romance Library. Because while the battle is won, the war has just begun. And young Torrin Stellan Moonbound has a destiny to fulfill that will shake the very foundations of wolf society. Subscribe to find out what happens when the unified king grows up, when other territories react, and when the true cost of revolution becomes clear.